Hello everyone. Today we are speaking with Mr. Vikram Gulati, country head at Toyota Kirloskar Motor. And the focus of today's discussion is India's electrification journey, especially in the personal vehicle segment, and the part Toyota Kirloskar aims to play in this journey. Welcome, Mr. Gulati. Thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, sir. I would like to start with the pilot that you and ICAT are running to evaluate Toyota Mirai, which runs on hydrogen for India's driving conditions. Could you tell us more about this evaluation process and what all factors are you looking to monitor during this pilot?
Look, at the outset, just allow me to give you a backgrounder to how technologies need to be assessed from the point of view of local context, not just from a point of view of local road conditions or temperature conditions or driving conditions, or even, for example, the local the driving cycle. Uh,
Mhm.
it, it's not just for, let's say, mm, this particular technology, it's basically true for all. So as a part of our endeavor continuously to try and evaluate all possible technologies that can help us move towards a more sustainable and cleaner future, we've undertaken this activity with ICAT. So we'll be evaluating in terms of how the vehicle works in Indian conditions. We are very confident that this product will be well suited because Mirai is already being commercially sold in many countries, and including very high temperature conditions to even very low temperature conditions. So it's things like Indian driving cycle, the temperature conditions, the other factors. So those things are usually evaluated as a usual protocol when you look at any of the technologies.
Mhm. Right. And I would also like to understand because the doubts with the hydrogen run vehicle is that we don't have an infrastructure for refueling. Who are the target buyers for a vehicle that does not have the infrastructure for refueling?
Look, I think what we are getting at here is, and if you look at it in terms of why we're introducing this vehicle in terms of testing, you have to basically look at the Toyota philosophy. Our philosophy really is trying to work for a future that is going to be much, much more sustainable. In fact, you'd be surprised that in 2015, 15, Toyota globally took 6 environment challenges, and 3 of these were to achieve net zero carbon by 2050, well before anybody was talking about net zero carbon. So this has been our continuous endeavor. The reason we have introduced the technology is because the fuel cell stack, which is in the Mirai, has can have multiple applications. It's not just about vehicles, it's about creating a hydrogen society. And what does hydrogen society mean? It means a society which is truly uh, renewable, it is truly clean, because you could link renewable energy to generate green hydrogen, and this green hydrogen can be used not only for transportation but also for multiple applications. In fact, very difficult to decarbonize sectors such as steel, cement, and many industries, including fertilizers. So now you would say, how does a car link up to all of that? Well, the fuel cell stack that sits in the Mirai is something that you can use for storing electricity, which is generated from renewable energy in a storage energy capture kind of a role. The same stack can be used in a train, it can be used in a ship, it can be used in a lorry, in a truck, and many of these applications are in fact being utilized. You'll be surprised that the same stack is also now going to be provided to Japan Space Agency for a lunar module, which is going to be used in the future. So it's really about in putting our bit to try and create a society that is more in harmony with nature.
Understood, sir. But if we come back to only mobility applications, can you tell us what is Toyota's plan to introduce fully electric vehicles in India? Are you going to keep your focus on plug-in hybrids first, or you have plans to launch BEVs in the near future?
In fact, globally, we were amongst the first companies, sorry, I apologize for that, amongst the first companies to launch an electric vehicle globally. In fact, that was way back in mid 1990s, along with GM. And our product was RAV4 BEV. Of course, at that time, EVs faced similar challenges, but those challenges were much more stiffer. We never gave up, and hence hybrid was kind of a technology which was invented, followed by a host of technologies like plug-in hybrid and subsequently the Mirai, the hydrogen. So if you look at these technologies, they're all belong to a family of very similarly placed technologies. So if you look at a strong hybrid, for instance, which we consider as being the mother technology of all these technology, including battery electrics, you have an electric powertrain and you have a gasoline powertrain. Now, the electric powertrain has common parts across all these technologies, whether it's a battery electric or a plug-in or a Mirai. The only difference is you are increasing the quantum of the components like batteries or motors, depending upon how you are balancing the energy. So if you come back to your question about when are we going to introduce BEVs, we have all technologies globally, and uh, we are in a position to introduce any one of these technologies. So from a technology standpoint, it's not an issue. What we really look at is go to the basic reason why this shift is happening. The basic reason is to try and speed up shift away from fossil fuel based transportation, reduce carbon emissions, reduce pollution, etc. So if you look at these objectives, what is important is two key factors. What is the local energy mix and what the consumer can accept fastest in a least painful manner, plus how the ecosystem is developed in a particular context. So particular, let's say, technology mix may be relevant in a country like Norway, which is having a particular per capita income, which is very high. It is predominantly renewable because they have huge amounts of hydroelectricity, and they have the entire infrastructure set up for supporting a pure EV type of ecosystem. But when you go to countries which are still predominantly coal based, and there is a sensitivity on the value proposition from the consumer in terms of how much he or she is willing to pay more to buy a product. And there is also the issue of ecosystem coming up. We believe a host of technologies, all this family of technologies need to be propagated. So we feel in such a context, perhaps for best realization of national goals, a full range of these technologies, including battery electric, strong hybrid, and in future, the hydrogen vehicle also would make sense.
Right. So, particularly for the Indian market, in your opinion, what is the right way to transition from fossil fuel based to EVs? Which vehicles do you think will take precedence or find more acceptance given all the factors?
Look, technology is always an enabler. It's not an end in itself.
Right.
So what you really have to see is national interests first. Technology is only enabling the national interest to be achieved. And there are various things that we have to keep in mind. There are not just our need to reduce fossil fuel consumption very rapidly at a very large scale. There's also a need to decarbonize, which the Honorable Prime Minister has given a very aggressive direction and leadership to the world. There is also a need to create those jobs. So make in India, but make in India with a lot of value proposition. There is also a need for keeping into mind geopolitical issues of not being dependent on any particular country, whether it is for energy or whether it is for raw materials. So all those factors have to be kept in mind. And the other thing that you have to keep in mind is the consumer. At the end of the day, if you have the best possible utopian solution, which incidentally is walking, not using any transportation mode at all, that's the best solution. But you got to look at the practical side of things. So consumer becomes the most critical stakeholder. Therefore, consumer acceptance becomes very, very important. And hence, there is no one single answer. You have a different answer if you look at it from the eyes of the three-wheeler segment, or vis-a-vis the four-wheelers, vis-a-vis the large commercial vehicles. So If you look at three-wheelers, it's definitely much easier to electrify, and BEV becomes the technology to go to. But if you look at it from larger formats such as cars or buses, it's much more complex. And I think the key thing there is to try and use all technology formats which take us away from fossil fuel and enable us to reduce fossil fuel consumption that much more faster and in a bigger way. And then once we are when we are developed in terms of our ecosystem, perhaps the mix of the technologies that will be existing in that time frame would be different. But at the moment, we strongly believe that all technologies, whether it is the full family of electrified technologies, strong hybrids, BEVs, but also alternate fuels such as ethanol, which is being talked about, it makes tremendous sense for Indian ecosystem, as well as CNG, etc. They all have a role to play. And you have to evaluate basically on the benchmark of national interests using scientific data and facts.
Right. But do you feel that we are not ready to accept battery electric vehicles at this point, and there is more preparation needed at the infrastructure level, ecosystem level, to have people buy these vehicles, fully electric vehicles?
I wouldn't say that. I really wouldn't want to put it in such a negative connotation. I'd put it in a slightly different connotation that as you move along the timelines, things will change, context will change, ecosystem will develop. Where we were perhaps in 2018 and where we are now, and thanks largely to a huge effort being done by the government, there's been tremendous shift. In fact, three-wheelers now seems like a segment which can get very rapidly converted to BEVs much faster than other segments. Similarly, if you look at a time horizon of perhaps 5 years or 10 years, I really don't know, which because there are various studies around that, you would look at a time, the context changing and the acceptability of different technologies also evolving over a period of time. So what I would say is the real issue right now is we can't wait for the ecosystem to come up. We can't wait for prices to go down to a level where consumer acceptance in terms of upfront capex is not an issue anymore. So what we really have to do right away is whatever helps us achieve our national objectives, we have to keep pushing it. Even in timelines such as 2030, if you look at most of the reports, they give you a scenario in the Indian context of a mixed technology ecosystem. Especially for four-wheelers and commercial vehicles. For instance, if you take Niti Aayog's aspiration goal, it's 30% EV by 2030. Now, 30% EV by 2030 means for cars, it means 70% will be non-EV, right? And if you look at the number of cars being sold, new cars being sold now, at its peak was around 3.5 million per year. This is expected to go up to 9 to 10 million by 2030. What it means is 70% of that is 7 million, which is almost double of today. So what we're looking at is even within a very aspirational goal of 30%, which many people are questioning whether we can achieve it or not. That leaving that aside, if we assume that we all put our hands together and we achieve the 30%, still in 2030, 70% is going to be non-BEV. Now, the choice before the country and our generation is to answer a simple question. Do we want that 70% to be just gasoline and diesel? Or do we want it to be technologies like strong hybrid, which reduce fossil fuel consumption by 50%, which is almost half a EV, and technologies like ethanol, flexi fuel vehicles, which have the potential to reduce fossil fuel consumption even much, much greater, or other technologies like CNG, etc. So that's the question. I think that's the question that we must address ourselves.
Right, right. Understood, sir. So Toyota Mirai is already selling in other markets, and you have other electric vehicles, strong hybrids, mild hybrids selling in other markets. So I want to understand from you, what learnings or experience have you drawn from your experience in those markets that you are going to apply when you electrify your Indian offerings?
I think 2 or 3 very strong learnings. One, all of these technologies are complementary. So it's not really, BEV versus SHEV or BEV versus the hydrogen Mirai or whatever. These are complementary technologies. They all have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. They all have their area of maximum utility. For instance, if you want to travel short distances, intracity, with less loads, BEV becomes much more practicable. But if you're going to have a much larger format in terms of a vehicle with very heavier payloads and longer distances, then other technologies like SHEV and plug-in hybrids or hydrogen starts becoming much more practical. That's one clear learning, that all technologies are complementary and they have their roles. The future is going to be not a unipolar future with regard to technologies. Even if you look at BNEF projections for 2030, 2040, even for countries and regions like Europe and China, what they predict is a mix. For instance, while the BEV penetration for new car sales goes up to almost 42%, those for strong hybrids goes up to 26, 27%, and plugins around 8, which means the hybrids combined around 32, 33, with the other formats remaining in place. So it's going to be a multi-technology future. That's the other learning. Third is that you have to leverage the complementary nature of these technologies. Meaning, today, if I have to shift to electric, it doesn't make sense if I import the key components, the powertrain from outside, which has the maximum value, and just assemble and sell in India. It is only going to be sustainable and viable if we are going to make in India and with higher value capture. And for that to happen, there is a vicious cycle. The vicious cycle is around demand. You need significantly higher demand than what is today existing to be able to get viability around investments, to attract investments to make in India. And one way to do that is to accumulate the demand from all of these technologies. So a simulation of demand across all of these technologies can help create an ecosystem of local manufacturing in a much, much faster way. That's the approach everybody took, including China, including the Europeans, and now including the Southeast Asian countries. So how you do that is you have to proportionately support all of these technologies so that they are much more attractive as compared to the traditional gasoline or the traditional diesel technologies. The last bit is really very important, that each country is a very different context. It has a unique energy mix. It has uniqueness in terms of its market, in terms of its consumers, their acceptance, their value proposition. You have to factor that in. There is no one solution which applies to all countries, and you have to tailor make your technology mix to best suit that particular country so that you can make the shift happen in a much, much more rapid manner.
Okay. And thank you. And I think my last question would be, in terms of your India offerings, what next can we expect coming from Toyota Kirloskar, specifically, and if you have any specific plans to launch an electric vehicle or a strong hybrid?
Well, I can't go into any specifics in terms of either a product or the technology mix. But what I can show you is our aspiration is to move towards mass electrification, not niche electrification. What it means is huge numbers enter the mass market and try and electrify that, and do it with truly make in India through deep localization, not only for India, but also for the global market. That's the aspiration we keep. Second philosophy that we have is whatever targets we keep for electrification, these should be practicable, and these should be centered around clear factors of consumer acceptance, local energy mix, etc., so that the shift to a cleaner future away from fossil fuel is sustainable, it is practicable, and it is doable, and it is doable in a fast manner. So I would place my answer in that format.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Gulati, for your time. Really appreciate your time and all the answers you gave us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate the same. Thank you.
Thank you.